Hi, everybody. My name is Rami Ismail. I'm an independent game developer from the Netherlands. I'm half Dutch, half Egyptian. I ran an independent game studio Vlaambeer for almost 10 years. I'm the executive director of the international games event, GameDev.world. I'm the creator of Do Press Kit, which is a free tool to create your own press kits for your game in under 20 minutes. I have about 30 minutes today, and I decided that I would like to give myself a bit of a challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the entire alphabet and try to teach you one thing about each letter of the alphabet, or a word that starts with that letter of the alphabet. So we're just going to get started because we're really short on time, and we'll see how far we get. So the first thing is accessibility. And accessibility is an important part of creating games. In the end, when you're making games so that people can play them. Accessibility is making sure that your game is accessible to as many people as possible. A lot of people think of accessibility as making your game easy or removing difficulty, but that's not really what it is. And for all of you, I want to recommend that you visit accessible.games. That is accessible.games, a website that shows you about 50 tricks that you could use to make your game more accessible without necessarily making it easier. And it's not tricks like remove certain things. No, these are structural tips about how to make your game better. And if you implement them at the start of a project, you will have more players for your game just because it is more accessible. So for B, we have the business case. And the one thing you need to know about a business case is that when you're doing business, really, it's all about value. Sure, you might love your game and you might love the art of your game, but in a business case, when you're talking to publishers, when you're talking to companies, it's about value proposition. And a business case really is nothing more than a justification for a proposed project or an undertaking based on its expected commercial benefit, right? The expected profit from your game. So when you're talking business case, remove from your head everything you know about money. Remove from your head everything you know about how much your life costs, how much expenses you have. What business is about is what the value is to the people that you're selling to. So it's not so much about I need $5,000 to make this game. No, is this game worth $30,000 to the people buying it, right? It's not about how much money you think is reasonable to ask for something. It's about how much money they think is reasonable paying for it. For the letter C, we have communication, and communication is really simple. It's the heart of everything we do. At the heart of everything we do is communication. A game is communicating your ideas via a computer to a player, right? Working in a team is communication. And the one tip I want to give you for all communication is always speak in the language of the person you're talking to. And by language, I don't mean French. I don't mean English. I mean speak in the discipline of the people you're talking to. If you're talking to a sound designer, don't say like, oh, the sound needs a little more like rumble, right? Like this explosion needs a little more rumble. No, say like, the explosion is a bit like, and I kind of want like, if you're talking to an artist, draw. If you're talking to a game designer, make flowcharts, make prototypes. But if you want to communicate well, try to communicate in people's discipline and try to always be open to listening. Right? Communication is not just about speaking, it's about listening as well. For D, we have the door problem. And the door problem is a blog post by Liz England. I would recommend you read up on it. It's a really fun blog post about how difficult our job as game designers actually is. Because when you say we should add a door to the game, you're causing a lot of trouble in your studio. You're causing a lot of trouble design-wise. You're causing a lot of trouble development-wise. And Liz England's blog post, The Door Problem, perfectly talks about that. Make sure you read that. It's a really fun post. So for E, I have Expo, and Expo is a funny one because obviously they're not happening now, but there are more digital expos than ever before. And in that way, this year, however terrible it is, I would probably not be speaking here today um, if it was physical expos this year, right? So this year, use the benefit of this global digital exposition circuit, of these global digital events, and apply to them. Apply to international awards, apply to international events, apply to international expos. Try, even if you don't really believe you have much of a chance. I never believed that my games had a lot of chance, and we got nominations, we got awards, we got lots of attention. And we were a very small two-kid studio from the Netherlands, right? Nobody cared about the Netherlands either at that point. So it is possible. You just have to, start submitting. For F, we have Fitts law. And Fitts law is a human-computer interaction law. It's called a simple law because the rule sounds very easy. The rule of Fitts law is the time required to rapidly move to a target is a function of the ratio between the distance to the target and the size of the target. It sounds complicated, but the basic version is if you have a mouse on your screen and you try to move it somewhere, right? The smaller it is, the more time it'll take you to put the mouse on it. And the further away it is, the more time it will take you to put your mouse on it. That's really logical, right? But with most simple laws, especially when it comes to how humans interact with something, there are sort of side laws, because when you think about what the largest thing is on a Windows computer, right? You have your Windows screen, there's a window open, there's your desktop icons, there's the start bar, there's the clock, there's the start button. What is the biggest thing on the screen? Think about it for a moment. If your answer is the start button, which is this tiny button in the bottom left of the screen, then you're actually correct, because it turns out that that start button is in the corner of the screen and your mouse actually cannot exit the screen, right? So if I would just throw my mouse to the bottom corner of my desk, the mouse would end up on the start button. The start button ends up being infinitely sized. When you're thinking about UI, when you're thinking about how humans interact with something, you have to think about the context of how people are interacting, right? Fitts law is one of the many laws that exist like that. And it can teach you a lot about how computers work and how people work when they're interacting with a computer or with a mobile phone. So it might not sound like it has much to do with computers, but it definitely does. For the G, we have game listing. And game listing is basically the store page of your game. When I made games at Vlambeer, we would spend months on getting the right screenshot. We would spend days on writing the text for that page. Making sure that your store page is great is worth investing a month of your time in. If you're going to spend 2 years making a game and you're going to ruin it by not having a good store page, then what did you spend those 2 years for, right? So don't make the mistake of thinking, okay, we'll do the store page when we're close to done, or don't make the mistake of starting on your store page when you're almost done. No, you should be improving that store page every day, even when it's not live. Look at the assets you need and just start making those assets. Start mocking up your store page, because every tweak you make to make it better is going to sell more copies, right? That store page is the most important thing you have. And people will look at it for like 10 seconds before they decide whether they want your game or not. So those first 10 seconds, that first impression, the first 3 screenshots, the little text that is on the right of the page or at the bottom of the page, those are the things that sell your game. Make sure that they are good. For H, we have HCI loop, the human-computer interaction loop. And this is an important one. This might be the most important slide in this entire presentation, right? Human-computer interaction, that loop, works in a very basic way. Imagine a quadrant, right? Four blocks, or a circle that moves around, right? In one corner, you've got the player, or the mental model, the intent. Whatever you call it, it's the brain of the person playing your game, okay? Now, that brain says, okay, we need to do something. And based on that, you're going to input. You're going to press a button on your keyboard. You're going to press a button on your controller. You're going to press buttons or do something that interacts with the game, right? You might touch like on a screen, or you like move it, or whatever it is. You interact with the game. Now the game is the third step. So you've got the player, you've got the input, you've got the game. The game is the black box. So the game takes the input, right? And it calculates stuff. It calculates stuff based on that input. Did you swipe? What happens? Like what? It does all that stuff, and then it outputs to the player through feedback. And the feedback is visual, it's auditory, it's values, numbers, text, it's vibration, rumble. And that goes back into the player, and it updates what they think and what they want to do, right? And it sounds really simple, but the thing you need to remember is that the game, the actual game, is not taking place in the game. It's not taking place in the input. It's not taking place in the output. The real game is taking place in the player's head, which means you can cheat. As long as the people playing believe something is true, then it is true. And you don't need to think about that again. So if you want your player to feel good, the game doesn't have to be fair. It just has to feel fair, right? If you want your player to feel strong, the game doesn't have to be fair. It just has to feel fair. One of the best tricks I've ever heard is when you have a health bar for a player, you want to make a really like tense, exciting game, just make sure that that last part of your health bar is worth way more than all the rest of your health bar. So when you get hit, your health bar starts going down, 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 and then that last part it goes down really slowly, so that you're always close to dying, but you never die, right? And yeah, it's a cheat. That's not actually how the game works, right? We're just kind of cheating with the visual language of the game. But because the player sees the health bar and it's like, oh, I'm so close to dying, it works, right? So the human-computer interaction loop, you can look up a lot about it. A lot of good people have written about it. Steve Swing, Ralph Koster, famous game designers around the world have written about this specific loop. Understanding it is critical to being a good game designer. For the eye, obviously, we have iteration. Iteration, the process through which we make games. You come up with an idea, you figure out a test, you prototype that test, you look at the results, you adjust accordingly, you iterate. No game is ever perfect. There is no perfect game. There is no perfect idea. There's not even a good idea. Ideas mean nothing until you start testing them, right? Until you start testing them, an idea is just that. And you might be an experienced designer. You might have a good idea of how things might work. But until you test it, you don't actually know. Iteration is that process. It's the process of, okay, let's try something and see if it works. Not, let's figure out how this should work perfectly and then continue from there. No. Let's try stuff, see if it works. Let's talk about it. Let's not get rid of any ideas yet. Let's come up with the worst ideas and go from there, right? Iteration is about accepting that. Iteration is about accepting that things aren't necessarily perfect and are not going to be perfect, but that through slow and steady work, it can be better and better. Juice, for the letter J, is the act of juicing up a game, right? So when you want your game to feel good or to communicate to players that something good happened or something bad happened, you juice it. Just like getting juice from a fruit or something, you want to make sure that you get the maximum amount of juice out of it. And the way you do that is through emphasis. So if you're making a platformer, think about what the player is doing, right? What are they doing? What are they up to? And when you think about that, try to remove the things that they're doing as pacing, right? Certain things the player is doing aren't actually mechanics. They're pacing. They're creating space between the mechanics. So in a platformer, your pacing is usually walking. When you're walking, you're not doing anything. You're just moving forward between the one jumping puzzle and the other jumping puzzle, or the one enemy and the next enemy, right? That is not a mechanic, so we're not going to emphasize it. We're going to make sure that it feels good, right? It needs to feel nice. The tempo needs to be good. The animation needs to look nice. It's not the part we need to emphasize, right? Now, what do we want to reward in a platformer, though? Obviously, jumping is the mechanic that the players interact with the most. So you might say, okay, so when you jump, that's what we need to juice. You know what? You're not wrong. When you jump, it needs to feel good. That's why a lot of platformers juice that moment by having like a little cloud or a little puff, like a little bit of dust that kicks up. That's juice. But the important part in a platformer is not the moment you jump, right? The important part of a platformer is the moment you land. Because if you land, you've survived the jump. You've done it well. So the landing is the part you want to choose, which is why a lot of games, when you do a big jump, they have like a nice roll animation or a cool effect when you land, to show you like, hey, you did well, right? That's juicing. Think about that when you're making your game. It goes for the things that are the most important, the things you want to reward, the activities you want the player to do. It's also for the things you want to punish, right? If you get hit, it needs to feel like you get hit. It needs to feel like you're getting punished. And making sure that you juice that moment too will help communicate to the player, this is bad behavior, this is good behavior. If you do it to everything, to every mechanic, it stops working, because now everything is over the top, and the things you want to juice need to be even more over the top. So try to like keep the base level low and the emphasis high, right? Kinesthetics is a complicated word. Kinesthetics is thinking about the feeling of interacting with your game. And unlike juicing, which is in the game, kinesthetics is actually about reality. So a phone, right? Like imagine you're going to play a game on a phone. Like how is your player holding the phone? How does it feel to press a button at the bottom of the screen? How does it feel to swipe up? How does it feel to press a button on a controller, right? Like how do these feel? How do these feel? How does this feel? When you think about those things, we've developed sort of a language, right? Like a trigger is shoot or accelerate in a racing game. On a computer, spacebar in a first-person game is probably jump, right? Swipe is probably dodge on a phone in a runner. The reason those things evolved is because of kinesthetics, because of the way that feels. A jump on a keyboard feels like a big action, so they put it on a big button. When you're making your game, think a lot about how actions feel, because the way interacting feels needs to overlap with the way the action in the game feels. That's when the game feels best. For the L, we have localization. Localizing your game is incredibly hard and incredibly important. The main thing you need to remember is that if you write text in your game, make sure that the space for the text is wider than the length of the text in English or French or whatever language you're using. German, for example, takes way more text, way more space than most other languages. And most games get translated into something called EFIGs: English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, right? Nowadays, Brazilian Portuguese and simplified Chinese are also part of that. Russian might show up. But EFIGs is sort of like the traditional golden standard of localization. Making sure that you have space for that text after localization is important. So don't make UI that perfectly fits your text. Make UI that will perfectly fit the German translation of your text, because otherwise you're going to have to redo it again. Bonus points for you if you make sure that your interface can switch from left to right to left. So you can also include RTL languages like Arabic and some other languages around the world, right? M is for motivation. And motivation is the most important thing you have. If there's three things you have as a game developer, if there's three things you need as a game developer, you might need money, knowledge, and motivation. If you have to lose one, right, you lose money, but you still have knowledge and motivation, you can make a game alone. If you lose money, but you still have If you lose knowledge but you have money and motivation, great, you just hire some people with the knowledge, right? You have money, you have the motivation. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much knowledge you have, if you can't be motivated to make a game, it's not happening. So in your team, in yourself, protect your motivation more than anything else. The money, it's hard. I know, like running a business is hard. Um, Earning money with that business is hard. But the most danger that I've ever been in as a studio has not been because of money, and it's not been because of knowledge. It's been because of burnout. And we almost lost the studio. Sure, we were almost broke a number of times. We almost lost all our money a number of times. But honestly, I would take those moments over the moments where I thought that I would never make a game again, because I felt so bad about making games because I was burned out. So protect your mental health, protect your like strength, your emotional strength. Making games is hard. It's exhausting. It's difficult work. Accept that and rest, right? N is for negotiations. And negotiations is very simple. The one thing I want to give you, the one thing I want you to take away from this is that negotiations work in a very simple way. They give their best case scenario. You give your best case scenario, and you talk until you hit somewhere in the middle. Now, a lot of people, when they talk to publishers, they try and make their budget lower, right? They try to fit it like, oh, we don't want to be too expensive. When they do a Kickstarter, they try to take the number down so that it's not too much to get funded, right? Wrong. Don't do that. Optimal case is what you negotiate with. If you hit that Kickstarter, right, and you make the number lower because people might not back it. If you need $20,000 and you say, okay, we're going to do it for 10,000 because otherwise people won't back it. What happens if you get $10,000, huh? Now you have to make the game for half the money that you actually need. What happens if the publisher takes the lower deal, right? Now you have to make the game for less money than you actually need. No. You negotiate, you start negotiating at what you think the best case for you is. And honestly, it's probably higher than what you're asking. Go a little bit higher, put 30% on top of it. Then when you negotiate, you'll hit somewhere in the middle, right? Don't risk negotiating a low number. Opportunity for O. Opportunity is hard. I know in Africa, it's hard. Access to funding, access to publishers, access to events and knowledge is limited. And an event like this is important to create those opportunities. And there are more events throughout Africa, right? There are publishers throughout Africa, but it's still young. Access to opportunity is rare. If you have it, if you get it, share with your community, share with the people around you, give people access. Yes, games is a competition. Yes, we're competing with each other. Doesn't matter. Help each other out. The more game developers are around you, the better things will be, right? So help each other out. And don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask from people somewhere else. Don't be afraid to ask from me, right? Feel free. Email me, message me, send me a message on Twitter. Find your opportunity. Like, you'll have to fight harder for opportunity. There's so many people around the world, right? And it's unfair, and I know. But I also know that you wouldn't be making games if you didn't care, right? If you didn't really care. So try it. Worst thing that could happen is you get a no, or you get no answer at all, right? And then what? Whatever. Who cares? Who cares about them? Who cares about that person, right? Let's keep going. Let's keep trying. Because in the end, making games is hard. It always is, no matter where you are. You might have some extra challenges, but you can beat those too. P is for play. And play is what games actually are. People forget that games are not a new thing. People have been playing since the start of humanity, since all the way at the beginning. In fact, play is probably the oldest thing humanity has. When people, when they were just starting out, were throwing rocks at a tree for fun, they were practicing aim. And aiming helped them survive. When they were climbing a tree just for fun, they were practicing fleeing from predators. They didn't do those things because they had to. They did those things because they were practice, because they were fun, because they were interesting. So play has been part of us since the start of humanity. Games isn't a new thing. Games is just the last evolution, the latest evolution of play. And it's kind of cool to think about that what we're carrying is a torch of tens of thousands years old. Um, we just happen to be the latest, the newest version of that. Quality assurance for Q, please take it seriously. A lot of developers around the world, a lot of the developers I speak to, take quality assurance as we gave the game to some friends and they played it and it was fine. No, quality assurance is a lot harder, and especially if you're coming out on consoles. You're not just talking about whether the game works. You're talking about whether the game keeps to the rules, whether it works on different devices. Having good QA makes the difference between a game that you launch and then you have 3 months of fixing things, or a game that you launch and then it's just launched and you can focus on new content, right? QA involves analyzing, documenting, recording data, reporting, monitoring, critiquing, and also testing, right? It's a lot of stuff. So don't take QA as like, oh, we'll figure it out. No. This needs to be an integral part of how you think about how your game gets made. For R, we have release management. When you're about to release a game, there's a number of steps you have to go through every time. And that includes creating screenshots, marketing pages, press releases. It includes uploading your binaries and your game builds to the store that you're going to be ready on. It includes creating like a discount, like a launch discount for a game. Release management takes time. If you've never done it, plan time for it. If you have done it, there needs to be somebody at your studio, or you, doesn't matter, who's good at this, who's done it before, who can do it again. This is an important skill. Train that skill. Make sure you have that skill in your team. And if you don't have it, please ask somebody who has done it. Doesn't have to be in your studio. You can literally just be a game developer you know from Twitter or wherever it is, Facebook. But have somebody who can do release management. Subway legibility, being able to understand a game if you see it in a bus or on a subway being played by somebody else, is a blog post by a game designer called Zach Gage. And Zach Gage wrote this talk for the Game Developers Conference of 2018, and I think it's one of the most important talks ever given. It's about how you should design your game, especially a mobile game, in such a way that if somebody was watching somebody else play it on a bus, they would understand it without playing it, without a tutorial, without somebody explaining it to them. They just need to be able to understand it by watching for like 10, 15 minutes. It's a very good blog post. It's a very good talk. You can look it up, GDC 2018, Zach, Z-A-C-H, Gage, G-A-G-E. Look it up. Really worth it. For T, we've got triage. And triage is, while you're developing a game, you should constantly be managing the things you still have to do. Production in games is complicated, right? There's a lot of stuff happening. All the time, you need to be looking at, okay, how necessary is the thing we're working on? How important is it that it gets fixed or implemented? And how much resources do we have left? How much time, how many people? When we talk about triage, I always use an example, which is, okay, you have a game, it just came out, there's 101 bugs in the game. 100 of those bugs happen to almost everybody, and they're a little annoying, right? But they happen to everybody, and everybody's annoyed by them. And there's one bug that will happen to only one player every 10,000 players, right? Or one player every million players. But it will destroy their phone. Which bug do you fix, right? Now, you can argue about this, and there's actually no right answer. You can kind of, like, this is up to you as a studio. But the thing that's important is that before this becomes a discussion, you already need to know what your studio would do, right? Like, what is the process for figuring out whether we're going to fix those 100 bugs or just about one bug? Who makes that decision? Why do they get to make that decision? If you know that, you don't have to argue about it when it matters. It's already done. Like, you get to that point, there's 101 bugs, you go through the process, you fix the bugs that you think should be fixed. With a lot of things, make sure that you discuss them before they become a problem, right, instead of after. The U is for user experience, or UX, and just keep in mind that UI, UX is also more complicated than you think. There are professionals that are good at this. Keep in mind that when you are making a video game, that UX is one of those things that you feel like you're good at, but you should probably get somebody who's actually good at it to take a look at it, because they will find super simple things that you can fix that will make your game a lot better, right? For V, we've got vertical slice, and the vertical slice is very simple. When you're pitching to a publisher, they want to know that you can make the game, and the way you prove that is by making a vertical slice. A vertical slice is a very small game made to the level of quality that you intend to hit when you're done. It can be just one puzzle or one jump or one level, right? Depending on what your game is. It can be one moment from the game, but it needs to look and sound pretty close to what it'll look and sound like at the end. And why you do that is to prove that you can do it, right? And to give them a feeling of what it would play like. You can fake it. You can fake it a little, but it has to approach, has to be close to the level of quality you expect to hit at the end. Yep. Yep. It should be really fast. W is for why. The W for why. Why is one of your most important questions. If you're ever stuck, ask yourself why. Why is this a problem? Why did we get here? Why is this complicated? Why would I not pick one of the options? X is for XLS, spreadsheets. Make spreadsheets. If you're a game designer, everything is spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are the fastest way to prototype, the fastest way to test, the fastest way to keep track of something. Love spreadsheets. Yomi for the Y. Very simple. It is the act of thinking about what the other player is thinking. It's trying to think ahead. If you're playing chess and you're thinking a few steps ahead, that's Yomi. It's a great thing to keep in mind when you're designing multiplayer activity. Like, how do players interact with each other? Like, how do they think about what the other player might be thinking? How much information do they have about each other? Interesting questions if you're a game designer, and Yomi is a really good theory about it. And finally, Zen, the Z. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, a Polish designer or a Polish psychologist, came up with the idea of flow theory. And flow theory is that feeling of zen that you get, a feeling of losing time, losing place when a game is really grabbing you, right? When the challenge is intense, but not too intense. Flow theory is critical in figuring out how hard your game should be and how much harder it should get over time. And if you have good flow, it helps making good games. That was one short lesson for every letter of the alphabet. I was 3 minutes late, but I got through it. Pretty happy with that. That was it for me. If you have any questions, find me on Twitter or email. I am THA_Rami, RAMI, on twitter.com. You can just send me a DM, or in my pinned tweet, you can set up a phone call with me for free, 20 minutes, to just talk about your game, talk about your problems, and maybe I can help you out. Either way, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for your attention, and that was it.